This week on Jerusalem Dateline, the UN and Israel. Why does the international body target the Jewish state while seemingly giving a free pass to Hamas? And human shields. Israeli soldiers say Hamas fighters are hiding behind women and children, even in the midst of a firefight. Plus, from the Gaza Strip, ordinary people speak out against the Hamas regime and call for peace with Israel. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Despite a declared three-day truce, fighting continued between Israel and Hamas. Meanwhile, negotiators went to Cairo to try to bring an end to the war now in its fourth week. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed that the war won't end until the threat of terror tunnels is eliminated. And the IDF announced one Israeli soldier has been abducted through one of those terror tunnels. And the U.S. and the UN criticized Israel for an attack on a UN facility. The White House called the attack at the UN school unacceptable and indefensible. Nearly 20 people died during the attack, but Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Ron Dermer told CBN News the incident demonstrates how Hamas places its military infrastructure within civilian areas and continues to use Palestinians as human shields.
They are forcing Israel, in order to defend ourselves, to attack those areas. They want us to kill Palestinian civilians because what they hope to do is to take those horrible pictures that would move any decent person. When you see children who are killed, when you see civilians who are killed, even in the most cautious war that can happen, and certainly in a case when you have an enemy that acts as Hamas does. What Hamas wants those pictures to do is they want it to lead to international outrage and pressure on Israel.
Dermer says when the world sees those pictures, the world needs to pressure the real culprit, Hamas.
And the question is, are we going to break this cycle of human shields? Are we going to finally have the pictures and pressure, lead to pressure on Hamas? If pictures lead to pressure on Hamas, the chances of them doing this over and over again go down. If they lead to Israel, you are actually not only endangering Israeli civilians, you are endangering primarily Palestinian civilians because they'll continue to use their own people as human shields. It's sick, it's grotesque, and it's got to stop.
During the conflict, Hamas rockets were found in 3 UN schools.
As a journalist who covers Gaza and UNRWA, I was not at all surprised that rockets were found in the UNRWA schools.
David Bedeen wrote, "Roadblock to Peace, How the UN Perpetuates the Arab-Israeli Conflict," and says UNRWA is actually hosting Hamas.
Our agency warned the United States government, the Canadian government, the European Union, and those are the prime supporters of UNRWA, that there was military training, military and weapons in the camps, in all of these UNRWA camps in Gaza. Our agency was ignored despite the facts.
Dermer says lawmakers on Capitol Hill are beginning to ask questions.
How did they allow their schools to be used as weapons depots? I mean, these are very, very serious issues that can corrupt the entire UN system, that are supposed to be there to protect civilians, are supposed to be there to help the innocent, not to allow their shelters to be used as basically military infrastructure for Hamas. It's just unacceptable, and more people are asking questions. We'll have to see what happens.
Some Palestinians living in Gaza are criticizing Hamas and calling for better relations with Israel. Our senior international correspondent George Thomas found a few of them and brought us these exclusive stories from the war zone inside Gaza.
Days after Israel struck Gaza's only power plant supplying electricity, Nidal Mihai's bread business has been firing on all cylinders because he uses a wood-fired oven.
We're in a crisis. People don't have electricity. They can't make bread at home, so they come here.
So who do people in Gaza blame for the war? Hamas or Israel? Well, even asking that question can potentially get you in trouble.
Business is certainly hopping at this. Shukran, Habibi, thank you. Business is certainly hopping at this traditional bread store here in Gaza City. That's hot. One of the things about, that was really hot. One of the things about talking to Gazans, especially in the midst of this conflict, is you can never get an honest answer because the reality is that many of the folks here are afraid. They're afraid to criticize the Hamas government.
We asked Mihai if Hamas has been good for Gaza. He smiled, then blamed Israel.
They're responsible. They must stop this war. Stop using bombs and missiles against civilian people.
But others like Faiza Ahmad Zahanin, whose family has reported ties to Hamas, told CBN News she wasn't afraid to criticize the group Israel and the U.S. have labeled a terrorist organization.
The government in Gaza doesn't do anything. Even on the radio, they don't talk about how we are suffering. May Allah curse them.
A poll taken days before the conflict started found that 70% of Gazans supported better relations with the Jewish state. Ragda Hijazi is one of them.
We need peace with the Jewish people. Good relations, not war.
A mother of 5, Hijazi says Hamas has to change itself and bring stability to the region.
Hamas needs to find a way to solve these differences with Israel, America, and Arab countries.
Some, like Salim Hijazi, want to see brighter economic days on the Gaza Strip.
My message to the Israelis and Palestinians is this: find a way to solve the issues so that we can live an honorable life, a good life.
Weeks into that bloody war, Hijazi has had enough.
We need to be united and have peace.
George Thomas, CBN News, the Gaza Strip.
Up next, is the U.S. hurting or helping Israel in its war on Hamas? And why is the international community hostile to the Jewish state? Our Reporter Roundtable takes on the tough questions. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. To talk more about the situation here in Israel and Gaza is CBN News senior international correspondent George Thomas and senior editor John Wagi. Quickly, you saw things on the outside looking at news reports. Yeah. On the inside, what were your impressions?
There is, to some extent, not all of Gaza is in ruins. That was the impression I got just watching the mainstream, the so-called mainstream media. But there are segments that are very, they're quiet, they're ghost towns. They're not all destroyed, but there is like Gaza City and 4 major suburbs of Gaza City. Absolutely, Sajaya and some of the other areas have really seen the might and the fury of the Israeli army.
Yeah, John, one of the big stories this week was the U.S. diplomatic efforts to bring a ceasefire, and they really seem to have backfired. What's your impression about Secretary John Kerry and what he's done?
Well, I think it's a reflection, first of all, of Kerry personally, just having a animosity from every spectrum of Israeli society, from the left to the right, and that's unusual. And not only that, you've got Mahmoud Abbas upset at Kerry at the same time. So you've got the antagonists who are usually fighting each other all on the same side against Kerry and the United States policy. This business of putting Israel and Hamas on the same moral plane and calling for an unconditional ceasefire on Israel's part has really gone down poorly, and it's a symbol, I think, of the reduced U.S. influence that's come from a number of decisions, whether it's Syria, whether it's the U.S. pull-out of Iraq, you name it, the whole chaos that came out of Egypt and U.S. supporting the Muslim Brotherhood.
That can you broaden that perspective about the America's dwindling influence in the region, but then you also see this is so emblematic of the chaos of what we call the Middle East, from the shores of Casablanca all the way to Herat, Afghanistan. You have this division. I sense that the war against Hamas and what's going on with Hamas is a reflection of the conflict in the region, that it's a proxy war. Who is going to hold the torch, sort of the voice in the Middle East? Is it going to be Hamas, Turkey, and Qatar, or is it going to be Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the United States on one side? So that's playing out so much more. Unlike, for example, the previous operations that Israel has engaged with, back then all of the Arab world was united against Israel. Today, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt are supporting Israel silently, but they would like to see the destruction, the end of Hamas, which is very interesting.
Yeah, this segment goes much too fast for this. But finally, George, you met with some Christians inside Gaza. How can people be praying for them and for the whole situation?
People are surprised that there are Christians in Gaza. Out of the 1.78 million Sunni Muslims on this tiny strip called the Gaza Strip, about 1,500 to 2,000, tiny population. Majority of them are Greek Orthodox. Then you've got Catholics and then Evangelical Baptists and so forth. But they're enduring, as are the rest of the population. They're suffering, but they're in the midst of that. They're hopeful. They're trying to encourage their fellow citizens to not give up hope.
That's it for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time right here in Jerusalem.